Welcome to our forum. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a few more people we understand are coming, but the last forum we had, we ran out of time with questions and answers, so we want to try to avoid that this time and give ourselves as much time as possible. We're here to talk to you today about a very exciting project that we've engaged in. And so the opportunity here, we have all the people involved with the project that are going to be a part of the presentation. And the opportunity here is to be able to listen, to understand what we're doing, but also to be able to ask questions. So whatever questions you have, whatever ideas you have, please be willing to share. We're very thankful. And now I guess I can introduce, let me do this. There we go. Greetings. We have Chris Warboys, who's also a director at Greenrock, and we have Bruce Valpy, who's the founder and managing director of BVG and Associates. They are the offshore wind experts that we have been working with to put this whole project together. So I just wanted to give them an opportunity to say good afternoon to everyone. It's actually evening for them in the UK, or late afternoon. But good afternoon, Bruce and Chris.
Hey, good afternoon. Good to be with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Eugene.
Okay, give thanks. All right, so we're here today primarily to talk about an offshore wind feasibility study series that we've been developing. So I want to start with the why. Why are we here? What has inspired us to embark upon this work? And at Greenrock, we have a vision. And we envision a future for Bermuda where electricity is affordable, energy generation is renewable, and our distribution grid is both dynamic and reliable. A future where carbon emissions are drastically reduced and the associated health and property damages that currently plague our community are a distant memory. A future that's built on sustainable practices that keep us in harmony with Mother Nature and make us proud of the legacy we leave for generations to come. So this is a big vision. So I want to take time for everybody to just think about this, because we're here today because this is the reality that we're hoping that all of you are willing to work with us to help to create. It's going to take a lot of collective effort. It's going to take a lot of us playing very important parts. But in the end, we feel that this is something that would be very beautiful and very beneficial for all of us here, for everyone who's not here, and even for the children who have yet to be born. You know? So let's just think about this for a minute. The first line is easy. Everybody wants a low electricity bill, but they want electricity. And they want it to work all the time. You know, so we have some people from Belco here, and you guys know all about that. You know, the lights just need to be on. The power just needs to work. You know, people could complain up and down about the bill, but at the end of the day, it just needs to be reliable and it needs to work. You know. Welcome. How you doing? No, feel free. You guys can come in and filter around. Okay. Feel free. Yes. Welcome. No problem. No problem. So our energy generation is renewable. Why is that important? At the moment, our understanding is that we send millions of dollars outside of our economy to pay for fuels, and with renewable energy, the fuel is free. That means all of that money is able to stay in our economy, and we can all collectively benefit from that. Our distribution grid is both dynamic and reliable. You know, at the moment, we've had limited sources in terms of how we've been able to generate electricity. We're just imagining a time where that multiplies. Maybe we have generation coming from all types of different sources, you know, different inputs, different outputs. You know, there's talk about, I know Stuart and I, we've talked about this, being able to take your electric car and power your house when the electricity goes out, things of that nature. So how can we develop a distribution grid that can facilitate all of those ideas? A future where carbon emissions are drastically reduced and the associated health and property damages that currently plague our community are a distant memory. You know, just thinking a time when we can say, hey, remember when Belco used to paint people's roofs for them in the area? Or remember when they used to clean people's cars and stuff? And people say, oh, they used to do that? Little children. And other people say, yeah, that was years ago, you know? So just envision that time. And a future that's built on sustainable practices that we all talk about, you know, that keeps us in harmony with Mother Nature, because Mother Nature is what provides for all of us. And another important part, that we're in a position to be very proud of the legacy that we leave for future generations. You know, so just imagine feeling very proud looking at grandchildren, and they're able to look at us and say like, wow, we really thank you for the job that you did in creating the environment that we have in the country. So this is a big vision. Like I said, I feel it's something that we can all benefit from, and it's something that's going to require all of us, or at least a lot of us, to be able to invest in and engage in to make it a reality. So we're hoping that this can be a part of that process, you know, and that's why we're here. The work that we're doing, the work that we do on a day-to-day basis in Greenrock is inspired in many cases by this vision, you know, particularly the work that we do around energy. So how can we move forward when we think about that vision? So in talking with our team, our thought is that if we can produce industry standard data and develop a comprehensive understanding of what's required to accelerate the deployment of affordable renewable energy in Bermuda, then that data can be leveraged to actually get us to a place where we're deploying. The thing about it is that when we look at any type of deployment, there's always a research, planning, and development phase. You know? Now, we have no vested interests on the other side. We're not looking to be, you know, running power plants or anything of that nature. But we recognize that this is a necessary step if we're going to get to that point. And so we've taken up the task of leading that. And so we feel that once we have that data in place, then whoever it is that wants to embark upon these projects can benefit from that data and use it to move the whole process forward. And when we talk about this process of moving forward, what are we doing? Well, there's been a lot of good work done by the government, you know, and by the regulatory authority. We had an energy IRP some years ago, you know, and renewable energy was big in the outcome of that. You know, we set some very high targets, which was very positive. I know we felt very good about it. And so we're now working with Bruce, who's at BVG and Associates, and they have about a decade of experience in delivering offshore wind. So they've been really good allies for us. Their team is extremely knowledgeable and really helping us to work through all the details of what it would take, you know, to deploy offshore wind in Bermuda. So together in our conversations, we've produced a series of feasibility studies. And through those studies, right, then we can bring all the technical and financial feasibility that is required to get a project off the ground. So it's been very carefully designed. And the idea is to address the greatest areas of uncertainty. Bermuda is a very small jurisdiction. Other places around the world have hundreds of offshore wind turbines being deployed. So, for example, that's one challenge that we have. Who's going to sell us so few turbines? You know, where do we put the parts of the turbines on the island? There's a lot of different things that are challenging for a small space like Bermuda, where other larger jurisdictions don't have those concerns. So we've looked at all that and factored the studies around addressing those key areas of concern. And I'll just quickly go through this. Well, actually, what I can do now, Chris, if you don't mind, I'd appreciate if you could go through the studies with everyone.
Sure thing. Thanks, Eugene. And I think I'll just go through them quickly, and then Bruce, when he talks later, can maybe go into a bit more detail. So after talking with BVG, we decided it made sense to do 6 main studies to try and kind of decrease the uncertainty around offshore wind in Bermuda and whether it could work, and if it could work, how it could work. And so the first study was just an independent review of the work carried out to date. So the Department of Energy did a study with UCSB back in 2014, I think it was, and the RAB more recently commissioned Ricardo to do another study into offshore wind. So BVG basically looked at those studies and 1 or 2 other kind of data sources, and based on their experience with the European offshore wind industry, they've given us some good feedback on, you know, which parts of those studies they thought were really useful, which parts they thought we needed to do more work on. Then the second study was to look at the cost of energy in a bit more detail, because if it turns out that offshore wind is going to be really expensive, then it probably doesn't make sense to keep looking into it further. And so this study's now been complete, and we're going to be releasing it, I think, in 2 weeks. And effectively, this gave us a lot more confidence that despite Bermuda's remote location and the small size of the offshore wind farm that would be built there, it's still cost effective. And in fact, you know, it's up to 1/3 less than the cost of generating from fuel oil, given current oil prices. So that was quite positive. So the third study that's currently underway is a spatial assessment, and this does overlap a bit with the work that RAB's already done and the work that the Waite Institute and DNER are already doing for the Blue Prosperity Plan. But in that sense, the timing is quite good. And so what this work will involve is really looking a lot more carefully at the different areas where offshore wind might be technically feasible in Bermuda. And so the focus is really going to be on, you know, things like the seabed conditions. Could you get a ship in there to install the turbines? What might the cable route be? Things like that. And then that will provide information that can be given back to the RAB, to the Waite Institute and DNER and other stakeholders who are interested in deciding where a wind farm could be located. Then the fourth study is looking at the energy production from a wind farm in a bit more detail. So the initial estimates that BVG have done use fairly generic global data for wind speeds, but there's lots of wind data going back many decades in Bermuda from different sources, you know, of local wind speed data. And it hasn't been recorded in the same way you'd normally record wind data for an offshore wind farm. But that doesn't mean it's not useful. And so this study will be a desktop study looking into all this data in a lot more detail to try and get a better idea of how much energy a wind farm could generate, and in turn how much the electricity will cost. Then the fifth study, this is quite a big one. So this would be electricity system modelling. So this probably wouldn't be BVG doing this piece of work. So this would be creating a model of Bermuda's electricity network and basically modelling the impact of different ways of deploying offshore wind and sort of stress testing it and examining how that offshore wind would integrate into the grids, and also trying to figure out the sort of most cost-effective way of accommodating the intermittency of wind generation given Bermuda's grid. And then the sixth study and the final study is an offshore wind roadmap. So when we contacted BVG, this was actually the first thing we asked for. And having discussed it with them, they've kind of taken us on this journey and explained it makes sense to do these other studies first before you get to the roadmap. And so we've kind of stepped back to step forwards. And so the offshore wind roadmap is really going to be a plan for Bermuda, so for all the stakeholders in Bermuda who are interested in offshore wind. So, you know, for Belco, for the RAB, for the government, for, you know, just everyone who lives in Bermuda. And it will just explain in simple terms, you know, what the steps are that you would typically follow, following good industry practice to kind of procure and deliver an offshore wind farm somewhere like Bermuda. This is really important because if we don't do this bit right, the cost of electricity could be a lot more expensive than it needs to be. Whereas if good practices are followed, there's certain steps that can be taken that don't necessarily need to cost a lot of money, but they can help to reduce the risk associated with the project and reduce the cost of electricity. So that is a really important one, and that's the final one that we're hoping to get to by early next year is our current ambition. Yeah, so following all these studies, you know, if the outcome's successful and it looks like offshore wind is technically feasible in Bermuda and it will be cost effective, then the next step is to collect bankable wind data. So basically, you know, wind speed and direction data that's good enough that it could be used to finance a project. And so Bruce will talk more about this, but effectively it's, you know, it's bringing some tech into Bermuda, like probably a floating buoy, like the size of a shipping container, that sits out offshore for a year or two and gathers really, really accurate data on the wind. And that would probably be at one or several of the potential sites where you'd actually plan on having a wind farm. And the reason we've kind of tagged this on to the end of the study series is that because this will take 1 or maybe 2 years to get this data, the later this is left, it just pushes back the date more and more when you could actually have an operational wind farm in Bermuda switching on and connecting to the grid. So if the outcome of the studies is positive, it is quite important to get on with the revenue grades, wind data collection, you know, promptly after that to avoid holding up the rest of the process for an offshore wind project.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. Much appreciated. So the idea, and Chris just went through them each, is that these studies can help us to determine if offshore wind is feasible for Bermuda, you know, and really solidly answer the question. You know, I said in our last presentation, there's a lot of comments, you know, especially when stuff goes in the media. One person saying one thing, one person saying something completely different. You know, some people say the cost is going to go up and others say the cost is going to go down. So how do you settle all that and get everybody collectively working together? You know, let's just do all the necessary studies, get the data in, and then we know exactly what we're dealing with going forward. So we can answer the question, is it feasible or not? And if it is feasible, then what's the best way for us to approach it and move forward? So that's the whole idea of the series in a gist. So as Chris said, the first of our studies has been completed, and we do have another study that will be released this month. In just under 2 weeks, the next study will be released. It's pretty much finished. We're just doing kind of like final reviews of it. And the idea is that all this data is just available publicly. You know, we're not looking to earn this data, or it's shared. So anyone who wishes access to it can do it. And I think that's a positive thing for us being involved with this, because we don't have any kind of vested interest in, you know, in the deployment side of it. You know what I mean? So we're just an unbiased entity well, I guess we're slightly biased as we do support renewable energy. So we're biased in that way. But, we have no business interest in this at all. We just want to get the data and the studies done in the best interest of the country and our people. So let me just pause this. Oops, let me go back one more. Let's see. So we're just going to show a brief video. We showed this at our last presentation, but in talking about this, and I get really excited looking at videos and stuff like this, but this is just an example of what it looks like installing offshore wind. I don't know how many people around the table have looked into that, but it's pretty massive and it's pretty interesting, like how it gets done. Just for clarity, what I am showing here is actually a Siemens ad, but that doesn't suggest we don't have any relationship with Siemens, or we're not leaning towards the technology anyway. We just found that this was a good video that kind of gives a good overview.
The potential for clean electricity production from ocean winds is almost unlimited. Building large-scale power plants at sea is a huge challenge, and it all starts at the port. The foundations for the wind turbines consist of two pieces: 10-story high metal tubes called monopiles, and yellow transition pieces, which are placed atop of them. Loading the installation vessel with this giant cargo requires precision and experience. Once at the site, the ship lowers its legs until it stands firm on the sea floor. The crane lifts the monopile into place before driving it deep into the seabed. A transition piece is placed on top of the monopile. It will provide a solid base for the turbine and serves as platform for technicians arriving by boat. With the foundations in place, the ship returns to port to pick up the wind turbine components. State-of-the-art installation vessels can load 4 complete 8-megawatt class wind turbines. That's 4 towers, 12 rotor blades, and 4 nacelles, which have been pre-assembled on land to reduce time spent at sea. Under ideal conditions, it will take just 24 hours to load all 4 turbines onto the ship. Specially designed fixtures and sea fastenings ensure they arrive safely at the site. As wind turbines develop, and especially grow in size, equipment related to all aspects of them also need to be developed. That's why Siemens Gamesa developed a lifting yoke with automatic connections. The crew can move large components like this tower via remote control from the safety of the ship's deck. Once the tower is in place, it's time to install the turbine housing, known as a rotor hub and nacelle. Each nacelle hosts the generator and all the other electrical components which will transform the kinetic energy in the wind into electricity. Even in high winds, the technicians on deck are in complete control of the components at all times. They can install the nacelle safely in less than 2 hours. Now it's time for the 3 rotor blades. These giants measure 81 meters long each, or roughly the same size as the wingspan of an Airbus A380, the world's largest passenger jet. As the enormous blade draws level with the nacelle, the technicians make the last adjustments. The blade docks smoothly and safely. With technicians working almost exclusively from the deck of the ship, installation can continue at wind speeds of up to 12 meters per second, which compares to a wind speed of 6 on the Beaufort scale. With this, a new offshore wind turbine can be installed in a single day. Over the following weeks, technicians connect the cables and thoroughly test all the turbines in the wind power plant. Once the power plant goes into operation, the wind turbines feed into a single offshore substation. The substation transports the energy to shore via high-voltage cables, from where it supplies the onshore grid. Each 8-megawatt Siemens Gamesa offshore wind turbine can supply more than 8,000 average European households with clean, renewable energy.
Okay, so that's pretty exciting. I actually get goosebumps when I watch it, but I've also seen a few other videos around it, and it's pretty impressive. It's said it a bit in the video, but not only do they have to develop the technology, but then they have to develop the equipment to actually handle the technology. So all the boats that go out, all the machines that lift it and things of that nature, it's really massive when you watch the videos and see it to scale, you know. So now that we've seen that, we've talked about why we're here. You know, we've shown the video about what it actually looks like deploying it. You know, how can all of you get involved with assisting to making this a reality in Bermuda? As I've said already, we got involved because we recognize that this is very important for the country. It's not something that we're looking to earn. And as Chris was explaining, even about the third study that we have, we're already starting to work collaboratively with other groups that have done that. We meet regularly with the RA, with the Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Project, the Wade Institute, you know, so we're talking to all these entities working together. And basically, this event today is an opportunity to get more people involved. We figure the more people that we get involved in this process, supporting it, you know, financially and otherwise, then the faster we can get the data, you know, and then we can get in a position where we know exactly what is feasible going forward, you know. So we've done a lot of work already. Like I said, we have one study that's done. Another study is about to be released soon. So we're very thankful for the sponsors that we've already had just sponsoring Greenrock in general. And we've been able to utilize those funds to get that done, you know. But we've developed new sponsorship opportunities around this project that we're hoping that, you know, some or all of you would like to get involved with. At the moment, those packages look like this. We have bronze, silver, gold, and platinum sponsorship. So you can go from having your name listed on the study, your logo on the study, or your logo on the cover of all the remaining studies, depending on which level of sponsorship that you're prepared to engage in. Just in general, overall, we're estimating that this is going to cost about $250,000 to get all of these studies completed, all the costs associated with doing everything around the studies that we've laid out. According to Chris and Bruce, and they can talk a bit more about it, that cost is very reasonable, just in comparison to other studies that we've seen taking place around to get that amount of work done for that price. You know, and we're confident that we have the resources on the island to be able to band together and be able to make that happen. The other sponsorship opportunities are around title. So rather than just getting your logo or your name in the study or on the cover, the name of your organization goes right into the title of the study, or your organization goes right into the title of the entire series. So, like I said, we're prepared to, we're sharing everything publicly, so every time we release studies, then it'll be all released to all the media, it will all be made available to the general public, anybody can download it, use it, share it, things of that nature. So if this is something that is of interest, then these are the opportunities for everybody around the table to be able to get involved, you know. And so we're hoping that we have these partnerships between, you know, the nonprofit arena, you know, the private sector and the government all working together collectively to make this happen. So these are the sponsorship forms. If you don't have them, then we can email them. I think everybody here should have been emailed this already, but if you haven't, we can definitely send them to you. And you can just note the level of sponsorship you're interested in doing, and send that back to us, and we can move it forward. So even the study that we have that's being released in a couple of weeks If anybody is interested in getting the logo on that study, then that opportunity is still available right up until the study is released about 2 weeks from now. And again, this is our team, a very small team. I just do the talking. And Bruce is, like I said, he's the managing director and founder of BVG and Associates. And Chris, one of our directors, he's the project lead. So I'm very thankful for him for making this project happen in the first place. So with that, I'm going to now hand over to Chris, so he can talk a bit more to us about why we got involved in this initiative.
Thanks, Eugene. One last thing I'd say on the funding is that Greenrock, we're entirely volunteer-based, so we don't have any paid employees. The funds that come in, they go straight towards funding the study. We basically have almost no overheads. So there's a very direct relationship between any funds that are received and the impact we're generating.
Mm.
Right. Has that come up for everyone, the presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about why offshore wind, because we see in the newspaper over the years and kind of hear people talking about different technologies. There's a lot of solar in Bermuda already, and that's growing, which is fantastic. We hear about tidal energy. We've heard about underwater current turbines. And so we kind of want to explain why we're so focused on offshore wind. So to start with, just some global context as well. In terms of where we're at with climate change, the latest IPCC document, so that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which basically represents the scientific consensus globally on where we are and what we need to be doing. They basically said that we have 6 years remaining if we continue to emit carbon at the current rate. And if we go beyond that level of emission, which we're currently on track to do, then, for Bermuda, the outcome is not good. So things like sea level rise, frequency and intensity of hurricanes, all these different things, are things that we should be really very much concerned about. And so what this graph is showing our current sort of emissions of carbon, so 40 billion tons a year. And so to stay within a carbon budget that limits warming to what's been decided is like a reasonably safe level, we need to see this really rapid reduction in emissions before getting to what people call net zero emissions around 2050. And this is really, really important because it's very easy when we hear people talking about net zero by 2050 to think, okay, cool, we've got 10, 20, 30 years, we don't have to worry about it. But as you can see from the graph, actually 2020 to 2030, we need to be seeing almost a 60% reduction in emissions. And by achieving these deep cuts to emissions early, that buys us time to then coast through to 2050 without consuming our carbon budget. And so that's why we're doing this work now. And that's why we have quite an ambitious timeline for completing all the studies, because we feel it's important to kind of move this along and get it done. In terms of targets for net zero emissions, 88% of global emissions are covered by net zero targets. So this idea that it's not worth doing anything because emissions in Asia or in some developing economies are growing so quickly, we're all screwed anyway. It's just not true. So globally, there's a good level of agreement over the need to cut emissions, and there are good ambitious targets in place. And actually, a lot of small islands across the Caribbean have, if not net zero targets, very ambitious emission reduction targets. So, it is important. We all have to make a significant effort if we're going to solve this problem. So a bit more context, new electricity generation capacity, if we look at how much of it is renewable versus fossil fuel, again, it's easy to think renewables are like, this small part of the market. They're kind of, they're a bit of a pokey technology. And this just isn't true. So like last year, 84% of net added electricity generation capacity worldwide was actually renewable. And you can see over time that percentage has been increasing, and the amount of fossil fuel generation technology being deployed is just going down and down and down. So the new power station that Belco installed, Bermuda very much needed that. It replaced a lot of aging engines. So, that was absolutely the right decision for Bermuda. But the challenge now that we've got those generators is we want to get as many renewables onto the grid as quickly as possible so those generators become more of a backup rather than the primary source of energy. And those generators can last Bermuda for many decades in that role. So this kind of idea as well that renewables are intermittent and so they're not useful. Renewables are there to reduce the amount of fuel we burn because it's expensive and it creates a lot of carbon emissions. It doesn't matter that they're intermittent because we just operate them in tandem with those existing fossil fuel generators. And so in terms of what renewable technologies are being deployed, if we look again globally over the last decade, we can see that the vast majority of new renewable generation technology is wind and solar. And so this is really why we're looking at wind for Bermuda, because hundreds of billions of dollars are invested in the wind industry every year and have been for over a decade. So it's incredibly mature, robust, well-designed technology that we're looking at. Some of these other technologies, like wave energy, they may in the future become, similar to wind and solar in that they're mature and they kind of establish themselves with lots of different suppliers, and there's a kind of robust supply chain. But at the moment, they're not really there. They're kind of pre-commercial technologies. And so that's why we're really focused on wind, because there's lots of different manufacturers, there's lots of different companies that can deliver wind. They've been doing it for a long time. They know what they're doing. They're some of the biggest engineering companies in the world. And so the risk to Bermuda of having this technology that's new to Bermuda, it's actually a technology that everyone else in the world has a lot of experience with. So it's not really new technology. And so just a bit on the Bermuda context, the initial work that BVG have done for the cost of energy assessment that we'll be releasing in just under 2 weeks has shown that the cost of electricity at the point of generation looks like it will be about 30% less than the current cost of generation from fuel oil. And if you look at how much electricity you could generate from a 60 megawatt offshore wind farm, that would result in around a 15 to 17 million US dollar saving every year for Bermuda currently. So, literally, if you put those two generators alongside each other and generate the same amount of electricity, it's $17 million cheaper a year to generate it from offshore wind. And so this is one of the reasons why we're very, very interested in offshore wind, because it's a mature technology. It looks like it can probably work in Bermuda, and it could save, a significant amount of money for a very long period of time. And so this graph is just showing the cost per kilowatt hour for some different technologies. So on the right here, we've got fuel oil and LNG. And these costs were calculated a few years ago for the Better Energy Plan, but we've updated them again recently based on the kind of latest prices of fuel oil and LNG. Then we've got costs for solar, at different scales. So bulk solar, like at the airport, is a lot cheaper. Smaller scale solar is a bit more expensive. And then offshore wind is sitting fairly low down in terms of costs. So it's certainly one of the more competitive technologies, which is very promising. And so just to give you an idea of the kind of contribution offshore wind could make, this was our kind of plan for where Bermuda's electricity supply could go back in 2018 for the Better Energy Plan. And so what the graph is showing is the total annual demand for electricity, so about 650 gigawatt hours of electricity a year. And we're projecting that's going to decline slowly over time due to energy efficiency improvements of appliances and air conditioning and things like that. And we have actually seen this. In fact, it's declined faster, I think, than we projected because of some of the other factors like people leaving the island, changes to business, that kind of thing. And then in terms of the supply, what these wedges are showing are the electricity generated from different sources. So we've got Tynes Bay along the bottom there, the waste-to-energy plant, generating a few percent of supply. And then we've got distributed smaller solar systems and larger solar systems steadily being rolled out through to 2038. And then this blue wedge is a 60 megawatt offshore wind farm. So it doesn't exist. And then all of a sudden it just switches on 1 year and you suddenly have this very significant contribution to electricity. If we look at last year's electricity consumption, if there'd been an offshore wind farm operational, it could have provided about 40% of the island's electricity. So, it is a very significant and long-term contribution that can be made. And you can see by 2038, 2040, because of that reduction in demand that's been forecast, offshore wind could be generating even more. So maybe more like 45 or even 50%, depending on the outcome of the grid stability studies and how all that develops. The demand projections on this graph, they do account for things like uptake of electric vehicles. But what we found looking into it was because electric vehicles are so efficient and people drive relatively short distances in Bermuda, that has quite a small impact on demand that is more than accounted for by improvements in efficiency. And so in terms of the feasibility studies, to give you a sort of quick general view of the different studies, we did talk about them earlier. So we've completed the review of the existing publications. We've completed the levelized cost of energy assessment and we'll be releasing that shortly. BVG have started work on the spatial assessment. So that's the next piece and we expect that to be done before Christmas. And then following that, there's the wind resource assessment, the offshore wind roadmap, and the electricity system modelling. That's just to give you an overview of the study series in its entirety. So with that, I'll hand over to Bruce. And I think I'll just say at the end, we're going to have some time for questions and answers. So, I'll hand over to you, Bruce. Thanks.
No, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Eugene, earlier on. Always inspirational, inspiring to hear you, and great to be part of this this passionate searching for the right solution for Bermuda's future power. We're loving being sharing that journey together. Let me share my screen, and in fact, before I put up a presentation, let's hopefully share the right screen. Just wanted to share, this is a snapshot of what's happening in the UK at this very moment in terms of our electricity production. And you can see overall top right here that just over half of our electricity is coming from renewables, and just about all of that is from wind. And then we've got hardly any coal left in the UK in the electricity system. We've got a bit of gas, a bit of generation from gas today in orange here, and we've got some nuclear. But as things stand today, it's a good windy time as winter is coming here, and the main electricity grid feeding, looking after 70 million people. The majority of that is being provided by wind farms. So just to encourage, it's happening, and it's happening on this big scale in many countries around the world now. So let me share my presentation that I'm going to talk through with you.
Recording in progress.
Briefly, and I hear that's now being recorded. That's fine. Hopefully you can see that. And look, guys, the really important thing here, as Chris and Eugene have said, is to get into a discussion to help you guys grapple with your questions and answers, and help find a good way forward. So I've got a little bit to share, but want to move on to your agenda rather than our agenda, and to talk through your questions. So look, we had an introduction to BVG Associates, my company. I've pretty much dedicated my career to helping countries and companies make good choices about the wind industry, and especially offshore wind. And each country is different. Each country has different resources, different needs, and whatever. And so it's really important that each country is enabled to make the right positive decisions for its energy future, in the context, as Chris has given, of a need to rapidly move to a zero carbon future for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. And I just want to encourage again there. I was at a huge big wind event in Germany last week. 30,000 professionals from the industry gathering in one place. So half the population of Bermuda, all wind industry people talking together. And there are a lot of delegations from different countries around the world, and it's really humbling, challenging, positive to hear them grappling with how they can take advantage of offshore wind in different markets. We've heard recently the leadership in Vietnam talk of the end of new coal power stations there, and a full move to offshore wind being a huge part of their energy mix. The Prime Minister of Japan likewise put up some huge targets for accelerating offshore wind. We've been working with the people of the Philippines, who are highly inspired and motivated to drop fossil fuels and move fully to renewables, and that's just a story we hear repeatedly over and over again in smaller nations, in larger nations. And offshore wind is cheaper, is cleaner, and is local for most places now in the world, cheaper and cleaner than the incumbent technologies that have been being used, and most countries have an opportunity to tap into offshore wind resources. So it really is high time that Bermuda's supported to come to decisions itself. So a little more about us. not to shout about our credibility or whatever, but just to give you a sense of that you're in, I think, hopefully good, firm hands in exploring offshore wind. We've been involved for almost 20 years in the sector. We've delivered a pile of the keynote studies and roadmaps for offshore wind in a wide range of places, and all these documents that are shown on the screen here are available on our website for free, and we do a lot of work to encourage and educate people so that they can make these rational decisions themselves. And point 8 here on the list, I won't work through it all, is we have this absolute belief that each market is different, and so the way to progress offshore wind and whether it makes sense for a market does just need to be worked out with support from people like us, but for each country. We're coming in believing that offshore wind probably makes sense for Bermuda, but our work is to help reduce that uncertainty and get to a point of being absolutely clear that yes, it does, or for whatever clear reason, no, it doesn't. And the work we've done so far is continuing to point at the fact that there's no better alternative for a large volume electricity production in Bermuda. And we imagine as time moves on that will be coupled with generation, most likely eventually using hydrogen as a fuel rather than liquefied natural gas or any other fossil fuel. Burning hydrogen is completely clean. It produces water from that burning reaction. And many countries are establishing, are starting to understand that coupling renewables, especially wind and solar, with hydrogen, which is a fuel source that can be stored, can be used when it's not windy or when it's not sunny, and can be produced by wind and solar farms when it is really windy and when it is really sunny. And so it's very much seen as a key part in finding a sustainable future. And it's one of the things that many companies that we've talked to are excited about the prospect for Bermuda. It's really hard to get a whole 70 million people in the UK to swap to a hydrogen economy or hydrogen-based sort of storage system. But actually it's feasible to help an island state to make that sort of transition. And many people are looking to island states to actually show leadership, because it's possible to do it first in an island state where it would take many more years to do it in a really big country. So look, our involvement and approach, and I don't want to repeat things that we've talked about. It is this approach to reduce uncertainty in the most efficient way at each stage. And the two reports that we've completed so far, one published, the other one about to be published, are focused on early reduction of uncertainty, working on looking at past studies and then on the cost of energy assessment. And maybe I'll focus a little bit more on that second study now. The slides here on the first study. The studies that were done in the past were good, useful studies, good to give a first sense of what some of the key challenges are. But they were looking, typically the challenges that they were looking at use of relatively small wind turbines that are much more expensive than using the state-of-the-art biggest turbines that are around in the market. And the two studies ended up with rather conflicting messages about maybe the best locations. One study thought that one location was great and the other locations weren't, and the next study it was the other way around. And what we want to do in our next bit of work is break through that and come to a single shared view as to the best locations. So I won't work through our review of the two studies in more detail. These slides are available if anybody wants to talk, and I can come back and share more on them. But also this lists the next the sort of the priority actions that come out having done these first two studies, but they're listing the sorts of activities that Eugene and Chris have talked about next, so I won't unpack that anymore now. But what I will do is just share a little bit more about this work that we've been doing on levelized cost of energy. So that's looking at the capital costs and the operational costs of running the wind farm for around 30 years, and then looking at the energy that'll be produced, looking at the cost of finance, and through that developing a clear picture of what's called the levelized cost of energy. And it's the way of comparing energy costs from different technologies in a direct sort of apples for apples way, and used across the industry. So to do this, we worked out some basic project assumptions. And we looked at two models. One model for a 60 megawatt wind farm using relatively small turbines for what's in the market in offshore wind today, and certainly right at the small end of what would be used for a project commissioned around 2028, which is the earliest that we can envisage an offshore wind project being installed and commissioned in Bermuda. And then we've also used the largest state-of-the-art technology that's likely to be available in the market in 2028. And we did a lot of engaging with industry because, as Eugene said, this is not a normal conventional offshore wind project. It's a really small project compared to lots being developed at the moment, where many projects in the UK are now over 1 gigawatt, over 1,000 megawatts, and we're talking about 60 megawatts. So sort of 15 times smaller than many projects, and also. It's a long way from where lots of the technology is produced and where lots of the vessels live, as it were. And so the previous studies that have been done didn't really take this into account and use very generic costs. And we went, well, that's fine for the first step, but we've got to get a bit more real about costs and the risks of costs being higher in Bermuda. So we unpacked that, and generally have had a positive story. So we look at three cases here. On the left, what would be the levelized cost of energy for a big project in an established market like in Northern Europe, and using little turbines. The picture there is that the cost of energy would be around $60 per megawatt hour, and using the bigger turbines around $50 per megawatt hour. Now that's big project in a big market. And then we looked at, well, what's a small project but in a big market? And we see some increases in cost because the suppliers aren't making things in such big volume. The development costs of the project are almost quite similar to do the wind speed measurements and to get the permissions and things, but then you're installing fewer turbines, so lots of costs per turbine are higher. So small project in an established market is more expensive, and then on the right we looked at a small project in a small market, and yes, we see that is more expensive, but actually encouragingly it's still significantly cheaper, as Chris says, than the incumbent technology that also has the challenge of needing to buy fuels from overseas, and also producing pollution that's completely challenging our climate and our biodiversity. So although the costs are higher, we believe these are reasonable, realistic, and actually they are, for Bermuda, affordable. So the study looked at exactly which cost elements were going to be more expensive and why, and we talked to a lot of players to build the picture. And overall, yeah, as I say, we see that the costs are higher. Bigger turbines are more offer a lower level of cost of energy than smaller turbines. But it's the positive that came out was that the industry was going, absolutely, we're motivated to build a project like this in Bermuda, and it's doable, it's feasible. We understand the nice video that Eugene showed with an installation vessel getting filled with turbines and traveling to the site. It wouldn't be quite like that in Bermuda. What would happen is one vessel would bring all of the turbine components to port or to shallow water outside a port, and then they would be transferred to that specialist installation vessel that would also need to travel to Bermuda, and things would be loaded onto it there, and then it would go out and do its installation work and come back and reload. That installation vessel isn't allowed to travel the oceans full of all the turbines on board. We wondered whether that would be the case. We've unpacked that with the regulators and worked out that's not possible. We've worked out what is possible. So that work, will be available, published soon, and happy to talk more about that, or happy to talk about any aspects of the technology, the costs, the environmental questions, the reality of developing offshore wind in Bermuda. So here's to a good open discussion. Thank you.
All right, give thanks, Bruce. Thank you very much for that. That's a very good overview. I had a lot of things in there that brought up questions, so I'm sure everybody has questions in there. I think the range of people in the room is good. We have people with probably very little experience and other people who have a lot more intimate relationship with energy generation in the room. We have some people in the renewable energy industry in the room, which is good as well. So at this point, if you have any questions about the project, any comments that were made, any of the data that was shared, any information we sent you, this is the opportune time to share and discuss it. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. My mistake. I missed a step. Because we're recording.
So good afternoon. My name is Kelly. I'm representing Bermuda Commercial Bank. Just a quick question in regards to the sustainability and our hurricanes. How would they manage for being offshore, and how long would they actually last, considering the actual abuse that it would take during certain seasons of the year versus the 30 years that you quoted?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a key challenge when designing a wind turbine, and part of my early career was designing wind turbines. When designing a wind turbine, you design such that all of the subsystems have the sufficient fatigue strength to generate power based on the average wind speeds day in, day out on the site, and to get a 30-year design life. But then you also have to design for the extreme storm conditions. And that's an important part of the wind speed analysis that's still to do, is to explore the mean wind speeds, where we've got a good sense already, but also to look at the extreme storm wind speeds that can be expected in Bermuda over the next decades. And that's always a challenge on every wind farm, that you have to make sure that you've got hardware that will stand up well to the conditions. And in Northern Europe, we don't have so many hurricanes as is experienced in Bermuda, but also as experienced in many other markets. So if we look at East Asia, Taiwan, Japan, areas of the Philippines, and not so much, but some areas of Vietnam, then hurricanes are an important consideration. They're part of the wind regime. So turbines are designed for those to survive those conditions. There are some amazing blade tests that are done where blades are deflected under huge loads to show that they're strong enough to survive the conditions. So the technology is designed to cope with these conditions, and it's an absolute key part of specifying the sites right, so that they survive for the full life.
So Bruce, just to be clear, you're saying that in spite of the extreme weather conditions that we face here, then the 30-year lifespan remains.
The lifespan remains, and they're designed to survive those extreme hurricane conditions. We have to make sure when the wind farm is specified that the right models of turbines that are designed and suited to these conditions are used. Not every turbine can be used on every site. You've got to make sure that you use the right turbines for the right sites.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say there's some external certification that's done, and due diligence is done during the design and purchasing process, and you'll find that all banks and investors in offshore wind projects are all over these topics. It's an absolutely key consideration when banks fund offshore wind projects, that they've got technology on them that is fit for purpose, and also that actually all the way through the development process, that the environmental work that's been done, the social assessments that have been done, if good industry practice has not been followed at each stage during that process, then the industry knows that it won't get the investors investing in projects. So the investors play a really important role in ensuring that really good, solid process is followed all the way through, and it's a key lesson that we help countries to realize as they embark on the offshore wind journey, that if they take shortcuts and try and do things in simple ways, then the international finance community will not finance the projects, and then they have expensive projects that are hard to finance, and you can't get the competitive finance that other countries will get.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much, Bruce. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, one last question. How easy is it to recycle these wind turbines once they've hit their actual age? So what do we do with them once they've actually hit their cycle?
Yeah, great question. And most countries will impose a decommissioning requirement on the wind farms. Before they're built, they have to know how they're going to be decommissioned, and also what the what the plan is to make that decommissioning process part of a circular economy. So the biggest material use in a wind turbine or in a wind farm is steel for the foundations, for the wind turbine tower, and for other components in the wind turbine, and that is highly recyclable. The wind turbine towers in the first place use steel that itself has already is from recycled steel stock, often to a fair percentage. So that's the biggest item. Steel is easy to recycle. The component where historically there's been less of a recycling journey have been the blades, and blades typically are composite materials, either and a mixture of glass fiber, typically epoxy resin glue, and for large offshore turbines also a good amount of glass of carbon fiber. And historically, that material has been broken down and used for road building or burnt for producing more electricity and things like that, but not very good uses of that material. But I sit on a steering board for one project, and there are a number of projects now that are looking at much more circular routes for wind turbine blades. So there's a project that's just been installed in Germany that's using fully recyclable blades. So actually at the end of life, you can melt the blade down to its original components and reuse them. And there are other projects that are doing other things to get a residual value from the material, from the blade materials at the end of life. And the view is that by 2028, it will certainly be possible to be using highly recyclable blades on wind turbines. Today, some wind turbines you can recycle the blades, others you can't. But over the next years, that picture is changing will change quite rapidly.
All right. Thank you again, Bruce. Any other questions? If you could just pass the mic down to Andre. Yeah. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Andre Labonte of Evolution Motors here in Bermuda, electric car distributor. I don't know if this is correct, but it's a sort of common understanding that the rationale for having a wind farm 20 kilometers offshore is to minimize the visual disturbance. Is that, or is that, am I incorrect in assuming that?
In some markets, going further from the shore increases the wind resource. You have less disturbance of the wind by the land. So in some places, there's a motivation to go further from shore in order to improve the energy production and reduce the cost. But in most markets, yeah, absolutely, going further from shore and distances like 20 kilometers is to decrease the visual intrusion. And this will be an important question for Bermuda to grapple with. There's a chance to use in some places, again, there's a wish to use smaller turbines because they go around faster. Maybe there's more of them, but for some people, they're less intrusive than a smaller number of large turbines. That view is quite mixed, and it's an important consideration for Bermuda in thinking about things. But we expect a distance, maybe not as far as 20 kilometers, but if you've got you're blessed with a lot of beautiful clear skies, often you don't need wind farms 20 kilometers away from the shore in Scotland, in the UK, because there aren't so many clear days where you're going to see that far anyway. But visual intrusion is the key reason, and you want to have a wind farm that is is balancing cost with environmental and social impact.
Excuse me. One other quick question, on a slightly different topic. You were talking about using hydrogen as a storage mechanism for offshore wind. Is that actually more economical than using battery storage?
Hey, look, to me, the right thing is that as we move to full electric vehicles, that most people only drive their cars for a couple of % of the time, and all electric vehicles really should be plugged in most of their lives, whether that's at home or whether that's at work or whether that's at the supermarket or wherever. And then you've got a storage system that is basically being paid for by consumers, but should be accessible to balance the electricity grid at any time. And we really see the advancement of apps and things in that space and programs in the UK now to really start trialing how this works, when cars are not just choosing when to receive power from the grid, but they're also providing power in the other direction to support the grid when needed. So we see that as an absolute key part of the future mix. What's hard to judge is whether that's enough or not, and that's quite a consumer question, because if all consumers said I must have my car fully charged every morning in case I go on a really long journey that I wasn't expecting, then there won't be enough flexibility. But if we can get to an arrangement where if you need to go on a long journey, yes, your car will be fully charged. But if you don't need it to be fully charged in the morning, maybe half charged or 1/3 charged is enough, then electric vehicles really could be a big part of that solution. And in a place where, like Bermuda, where you cannot go off on too long a journey in your nice electric car, then there shouldn't be a need for everybody to have their car fully charged every morning. And electric vehicles can be an absolute key part of the balancing, and then that reduces the need for hydrogen storage and generation from burning hydrogen or using hydrogen in fuel cells.
All right. Give thanks. Any other questions? I see a lot of people thinking.
And questions for Chris as well, and for Eugene.
Yeah.
Questions about the sponsorship. I don't know. It could be anything, not just about offshore wind.
Yeah. Could you pass it down to Sinclair? Yeah.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zane Sinclair from Sinclair & Cecil, Edible Gardening and Organic Landscape Management. And my question for you guys is that, you guys mentioned you did a study, so how will you be educating Bermudians on the jobs that come through these opportunities offshore and shores, the engineers, architects, whoever's involved? So my question is, how are you going to inform them or letting them know there's opportunities in this industry and to get prepared?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, we talk about things of this nature. We recognize that anytime you get into a new industry, new opportunities become available. We haven't necessarily put a strategy in place for that right now. We're just trying to determine if this industry is feasible for Bermuda, but definitely, should we get to the point where it's established very clearly that it is, then move into that step of making sure that we have the systems in place to ensure that Bermudians are being developed in this area is going to be key. Obviously, initially, it's going to be a lot of input from, areas where this type of deployment is far more common. But there's a huge opportunity for training and development as it relates to this industry. That's one of the things that excites us about renewable energy. I talked in the beginning about how much the millions of dollars that go out of our economy for fuel oil. And if the fuel is free, then that money is all being reinvested in our own economy, and a lot of that reinvestment would, go directly to new jobs. opportunities on the island, you know. I don't know if you want to add to any of that, Chris or Bruce.
I'll just say that, as we said earlier, you know, we're volunteers. We're just trying to figure out if it's feasible, if it can save everyone money, and provide a sustainable, stable, long-term source of energy for the island. So we're really focused on that. And I think if we can establish definitively whether or not that's the case and provide a roadmap of how you could deliver an offshore wind farm in Bermuda, at a certain point, our involvement as Greenrock, we do have to step back and we kind of hand everything over to, you know, the government, the RAB, Belco and others who it's their paid job to do this stuff. And so things like training people up in, you know, maintenance for offshore winds, that kind of thing, it's probably a bit beyond Greenrock's scope just in terms of what we're able to do. But I think the important thing is, you know, one, the cost savings, they're significant and they help every single person and every business in Bermuda. So that helps support jobs indirectly. And the second thing is it's the future, you know, like we know everything's going this way. So it's better, rather than being scared of it, it's good to embrace it and to figure out how it can work in Bermuda. And then the jobs that are created around that are jobs that can be there for decades, rather than, you know, some jobs in the fossil fuel industry at the moment, they're going to be disappearing within, you know, whether it's a few years or a decade. So they're not long-term kind of stable propositions for people. So, you know, I think Greenrock's very interested in trying to encourage this positive transition where we plan to move towards more sustainable energy sources rather than being forced to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good thing. Good.
So absolutely. I think that the key time for education is when it gets to the point of deciding, yes, it does make sense. If it's decided that, yes, it does make sense to do offshore wind, then it's really important to educate people in what that means, what the impacts are, what the whole process is going to be like when it happens, what that means in terms of things coming into the island, the vessels that are going to be there, what people see out at sea, and things like that. So there'll be an important time for that. And in terms of the actual jobs created, as the guys have said, the most valuable jobs are the long-term jobs through the whole life cycle, through the day in, day out of generating electricity from the wind over that 30-year project life cycle. It's not a huge number of jobs. One of the things that the offshore wind industry has done very well in the last 15 years is reduce its costs hugely. And that the cost of energy has reduced by, you know, by much more than a factor, much more than half what it used to be. And how do you reduce costs? It's often because fewer people need to be involved in the manufacture or in the installation and through the whole process. So it's not a huge number of jobs that will be created, but they are long-term, skilled, competent jobs of people really going out, and the main thing is people going out and servicing the turbines, keeping them running smoothly, and doing repairs out at sea of the turbines, of the foundations, and then stocking the spares and things like that are needed on land in order to keep the wind farm running well. And the company that develops the wind farm, they will want to have a well-qualified, experienced team of people, local people doing that. It's always the way that those teams are local and are well-trained, because a well-trained team will keep the turbines running well over a long period of time. And that's absolutely vital to keep the costs and the technology in good condition.
Yeah. All right. Give thanks, Bruce. Stuart.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple quick ones. existing offshore wind farms and turbines that are there, what's the highest wind speed ever recorded that they've sustained without any issue? What's the longest, like how long is the oldest wind turbine been operating? And just to put minds at ease. And then I guess the big question that you guys probably want to answer, or we want to know, it sounded like 250K is the ask. How much have you guys already raised? And I noticed in the slides before, I think it said, you're already done study number 2, study number 3 is confirmed. Study number 4 is, wait a second, we got to see how much money we raise. Where are you at? When? How much funding do you need, and when? What are your targets so that people understand how critical it is to assist?
All right, I could jump in on that. So, we need the running as soon as it can be available. We have very aggressive targets in terms of when we want to get this work done. And Chris spent a lot of time explaining why it's important to get this work done in a timely manner. It's absolutely important that this work is done before any type of deployment can happen. Now, he was even talking about the LiDAR, study and stuff, and collecting the data that way, and that takes a few years, and that comes after all of these studies are done. You know what I mean? So in terms of the money, we're in need of funds as soon as we can raise the funds. So we're hoping that, those of you who see value in what we've embarked upon will be prepared to contribute as soon as possible. In terms of what's been raised so far, we've used all our own resources to do everything that's been done, not necessarily because we're in a financial position to cover the whole study series, but just because we recognize that this is something important and we just went for it. And we've just had the confidence that we'd be able to partner up with people in the community to make sure that it's all completed in a timely manner. You know what I mean? So yes, we need to raise all the funds really for the studies, because we still have all our other programs and things of that nature and the advocacy work and the awareness work and education that we do on a regular basis. So it's not like these funds that we've spent were allocated to this. It's just what we've chosen to do to launch it. So at least when we come to the table here, we're not asking you to put up funds to get something started. The ball's already rolling and work's already being done.
And to answer the offshore windy technical questions in there, the first offshore wind farm was built in 1991, and that ran until 2017. So it ran for just over 25 years. And the turbines were designed at that point for a 20-year life, so they ran for longer than the initial design life. Now, wind turbines are designed for 25 or for 30-year lives. And in terms of the gust wind speeds that have been recorded, so most offshore wind farms are designed for an extreme gust wind speed of 70 meters a second. And those wind farms have often seen gusts of around 65 to 70 meters a second. Some are a little bit more than that they've seen and survived. There are wind farms around that are designed for extreme winds of 80 to 85 meters a second. That's the maximum that they've been designed for so far. And yeah, there have been gusts, I think, into the late 70s and early 80s meters per second. These are short-term gusts that are just lasting a few seconds. The wind industry talks in meters a second, but these are much higher wind speeds than typically you have down at sort of the height of roofs of houses and stuff like that. So yeah, wind farms have seen the sort of design wind speeds that they were designed for, and have survived those wind speeds. And there are wind farms that have been around for many decades now offshore, as well as many millions now of wind turbines onshore that have had very long lives.
Mm-hmm.
So the finance community and the technical community is typically not that concerned about it's built confidence that the technology is fit for purpose. But it's still important to recognise when we work in a different environment with different extreme wind speeds, to make sure that we're choosing the technology that's fit for that purpose.
Yeah, thank you. Just to confirm, for Imperial, for 70 meters per second, you're talking 160 odd miles an hour. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we can grasp that a lot easier.
Yeah, I was going to ask for
Yes.
a conversion.
Yeah, you can whatever some people kilometers per hour, whatever 70 meters a second is 250 kilometers per hour. The important thing to be aware whenever we are communicating about wind speeds, and it's often in meters a second, is to be clear what the averaging period is, whether it's a really short gust or whether it's an hour-long average wind speed or whatever. And there's quite often people that miscommunicate about these wind speeds and things like that. And it's really important to get the language sharp if you're really trying to tie down the real conditions.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Bruce.
Okay.
JP. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciated there was a slide about the different types of technologies that are being employed around the world and the reduction, of obviously fuel-based ones. But why did we settle on wind versus, say, doubling down on solar or wave or something different? Like, how did we get to that? Like, how did you come to the decision to kind of press forward and look at this as feasibility for wind? And I have one more.
Okay, no problem. I can just before, I mean, and Chris and Bruce, you can correct me if I'm wrong. One of the things I know, for example, we have the solar figure, just to make it relative to Bermuda. My understanding is that the average turbine can generate, one turbine can generate what 20-something thousand solar panels are generating and more. You know what I mean? So that's one of the reasons for that. But I can let Chris, you and Bruce can go at that as well.
Yeah, Eugene, stay out of the technology question. I think the key thing here is Bermuda doesn't have a lot of space on land. If you're in Australia or you're in North Africa, solar is probably the right thing to do in big volumes, then maybe onshore wind. But there's just not enough space for onshore wind and solar to generate the sort of amount of electricity that's needed for Bermuda. Chris can say a little more about that, but maybe the other technologies, wave power, tidal power, things like that we've worked on this technology for decades as a business. It's still far more expensive and far from proper commercial projects. So the choice is offshore wind, really, because it's the technology that can be done in the volume that's needed and at the price that is more attractive than anything else as things stand today. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and so we actually looked into this in 2018 for the Better Energy Plan, and which was one of the plans that the RAB thought about, and they were coming up with their integrated resource plan, which is like Bermuda's future plan for electricity. And I'll just have those graphs come up for everyone?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you?
Yeah,
can you
yeah, we see
like,
it. We can see it. Mhm.
Colourful graphs.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah, great. So what these graphs show is some of the modelling we did for that plan. So we looked at a week in January and a week in July, and we looked. So the black curve is demand for electricity, so how that's increasing every day and then dropping off in the evening. And then the yellow area is solar generation. And so what we did, we kind of increased the amount of solar generation more and more and more. But what you find is above a certain point, you generate more solar than you need during the day. And it gets quite expensive to store it all to then use it overnight. And so what you find with solar is that once you get to a certain amount, about 80 or 90 megawatts of solar, it gets more expensive to add more solar. And so it's not that it's not possible, and those numbers may change in the future. But what we found was if you have some wind as well, which is shown in blue on this graph, so this is the output from a 60 megawatt wind farm using actual wind data for Bermuda. And that kind of shows that you get these nice long periods, even in the summer, where you just get lots of generation from wind that can support the solar. And so by combining these two renewable technologies, you get a much more stable, consistent output of electricity throughout the year. And so that's the main reason why. So we're not saying just wind at all, lots and lots of solar, but wind as well. And it gives you this good balance. And quite often with wind and solar, you see the seasonal trends complement each other very well. It's like in the winter, it's super windy in Bermuda for most of the winter. But there are those extended calm periods in the summer when the high pressure sets in. And so, that works well with combining wind with solar, because in the summer, you've got a lot more solar generation. And then when you have less solar in the winter, you've probably got more wind.
I have just one more question.
Okay.
And I might have missed it, but and there's 8 to 10 reports. Can you give us the total price tag of what you are seeking?
Right.
Okay. What's the big number?
Right. Well, we're expecting that our costs are around $250,000 for doing the whole series. So yeah, so that's the number that we're looking to raise. JP?
Yeah, it was a weird question, but I guess with climate change and hurricanes and typhoons getting stronger and stronger, I'm assuming that the technology will endure that, especially if you're building places like Philippines where they have super typhoons coming through on a very regular basis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Bermuda's getting more and more hurricanes on a regular basis. These aren't one-time events. I mean, obviously you know all this, but I'm just expressing a
Yeah.
bit of a concern.
Yes. I was told not to talk about the technical stuff, so I'll let Bruce tell you about the typhoon rated turbines.
Oh no, you can do this, Eugene. Yeah, look, a really important engineering practice that people have been learning about in recent times is whether it's from an architecture perspective or building and designing other structures. There used to be a language around a 1 in 50 year survival wind speed, and you worked out what was the highest wind speed you expected to have once in 50 years. And I remember with the first wind farm that we put up in the UK, we had the 1 in 50 year storm 4 times in the first 10 years. And that was one of those moments where people just started realizing that actually just assuming that the climate is going to be the same as it has been for generations is no longer acceptable. It's no longer enough. So you're absolutely right that one of the key challenges about climate change is that the extreme events are getting more common. And so a really key part of getting the specification for a wind farm in Bermuda right is not just to say, well, what's been the biggest gust wind speed we've had in the last 50 years, and let's assume it's going to be the same for the next 50 years, but is to use climate science to make sure that the specification of that worst storm that can be expected in Bermuda in the next years really takes account of the changing climate. And that's something that is needed in all buildings, in all sorts of technical disciplines, as well as in the wind industry. So it's a key part of specifying the future conditions, that we aren't just assuming it'll be the next 50 years will be like the last 50 years. And there's a question that needs to be grappled with in all places where the conditions that are being seen are higher and higher than in the theory would suggest.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, Bruce.
Fully taken into account.
Mm-hmm. So any other? You have a question? Okay.
Who do we see owning this? So who is going to be the person responsible for this? So if you have all the investors, how are we protected, basically? So who is the person running this project once it gets approved by government or whoever? Who is the main person behind this, or company behind this?
Well, in truth, that's yet to be seen, so our focus here is on the feasibility study, and then that study can be utilized by whomever wishes to use it. So obviously we have people from Belco in the room. This is something that Belco could very easily invest in if that's what they decide to do going forward. You know what I mean? It could be another group that looks to get together and proposes to do something in Bermuda. We just recognize that the data and the studies are necessary regardless of who does it, and we're putting our focus on making sure that that work is done. We really want to see renewable energy deployed, and basically we're trying to eliminate excuses for not getting the work done. So we figure the more we can do to lay all the pieces down and make it as easy as possible, get bankable data that people can get investments around, then it just makes it that much easier for us to accelerate the deployment. So we're not. That's a question that we're not able to answer at this point. Yeah.
A key thing I've been...
Yes. Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
I think, to some extent, that's getting into like the RAB's territory. So, there is already some legal structure around the ownership of electricity generation assets in Bermuda, and this project would come under that. And there might need to be changes to the legislation to the way that's done to help reduce the cost of electricity. I think the answer is probably that there's different ways it could be done. So, Bruce, I'm sure you're aware of different ways in which that's been done in different projects. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what kind of structures might work well for somewhere like Bermuda.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and this is part of the roadmap activity, which is the last of the studies to really grapple with this question. But initially, a couple of important things. Whoever designs the wind farm and develops the wind farm and chooses the technology and hires the boat to go and install the turbines and things like that, that should be a company that is experienced in doing this in other markets. It shouldn't be a company that's trying it for the first time ever in Bermuda. That's not fair on a small project to be a learning company that hasn't done it before. So that might not be the eventual long-term owner of the project. It might be someone that comes in, builds the wind farm, and then sells it after it's been built. Or it could be that company that actually develops and builds the wind farm stays as the long-term owner. But probably the journey to gathering the full lot of data and ideally somehow it's right for Bermuda to enable some level of competition to make sure that the price that's agreed for the electricity is a competitive price. And that one way to enable that is for the government to do more of the early work to understand the site conditions and whatever, and then to put together a package of information and then encourage project developers to bid for the right to build the wind farm. That's quite a common model. But it may be that there are other models that become more suitable for Bermuda, but we could imagine that'd sort of be the process, and then the project might be owned long term by a company that has experience in offshore wind in other markets. And Belco's owner Algonquin has interests in offshore wind. It's starting to explore offshore wind in other markets, so it could be Belco, it could be somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? Or go ahead.
Can you give us a price or an estimated price for the LiDAR studies that come after all of these?
Do we have an estimate of the cost for the LiDAR studies?
So the work that we've mapped out at the moment is to do some more work on the sort of the estimated wind speeds for Bermuda by looking at the data that Chris mentioned. There's data from various Met stations, and then there's some more modelling that can be used on global data sets to get a somewhat improved confidence in wind speed. But then the next stage is to commission a LiDAR to be put out in a floating LiDAR to be put out into the sea, and our work goes as far as writing a specification for that work, so that there can be a good competition to choose who should do that work. Typically, that work does cost between $500,000 and $1 million a year for that sort of data set, and I don't expect it to be cheaper in Bermuda because the LiDAR's got to be brought from Europe or from the US, and there aren't ready companies that are regularly putting LiDARs out into the sea in Bermuda. But I don't think we see that as being a Greenrock offering. That then needs to be, once it's really making sense to do offshore wind, would either be something funded by government or by a climate finance bank or alternative.
Mm-hmm. All right, give thanks. So we're coming up upon 2:00. I really appreciate all of you who have hung around through the presentation, and thank you, Bruce and Chris, for sharing so much valuable information with everyone who has attended. Hopefully you've gotten a good appreciation of the work that we're currently engaged in. Our key focus now is developing partnerships in order to make sure that this work is done. As I said in the beginning, we recognize this as very important work for Bermuda, and also very important that it's done in a timely manner. Hopefully all the information that was shared today helps you to come to that same conclusion as well. We will be sharing all the studies that are developed on our website and sharing it with all the media just to make sure that everyone has access to it. And the sponsorship opportunities that we have made available, we're hoping that many of you around the table are interested in engaging. If you have any further questions and would like to speak to any of us privately, we're happy to come and meet with you to talk a bit more about how you can get involved, or if you're looking at making a decision about, what choice you make and things of that nature. We're happy to arrange those meetings or phone conversations to talk to you privately as well. But, ultimately for us, it's about the overall vision and the future we see for Bermuda. And it's not something that's just going to happen on its own. It's something that we're really going to have to engage and invest in, with our time and our energy and our money as well. So thank you, everyone who attended today. Hopefully you enjoyed the experience. Again, thank you guys for all of your input, and we look forward to working with all of you going forward. All right? All right.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Give thanks, Chris and Bruce.